All right, what I'm looking at right here, I want to show you guys several little things here. You got these, whenever you're going in there, this is particularly, this is one.
You tell this guy he can try that? The door's good to go?
Yeah.
We didn't ever figure out when the lights was going on.
Don't worry about all that, he needs to go anyway, because we can work on the rest of the day. Look at that scan, do let come back in here. Anyway, what I was getting at is,
Didn't see that coming.
you notice how this has got a, what you call a shift point road test. When you get through with an automatic transmission, as you've been working on, if you've been troubleshooting something that's wrong with it, you want to make sure it's doing right. You got to watch, whenever you're going through there, make sure it shifts smoothly like it's supposed to at the right speeds. And this right here, and I'm just pulling this right out of ALLDATA, is basically giving you, it's giving you what the shift positions are supposed to take. See that? Basically, you can look into here. This is the miles per hour when the shifts are supposed to take. Closed throttle position. And notice right here, it's shifting from 6 to 5th, 5th down to 3rd, and 3rd down to 1. Not that. It's in your D position shift when you're in drive. Minimum throttle voltage. That's the accelerator pedal position 3. Why are they talking about accelerator pedal position 3? Why do we got more than one accelerator pedal position? It's electronic throttle body. So you basically have redundant sensors that basically have different patterns, and it's watching those so it'll know that if you've got a problem with any one of those throttle position sensors, it will, you know, limit the throttle and all that kind of thing. Anyway, so the cold strategy, you might notice, is a little bit different from the hot strategy. Now, what's different on an automatic transmission when it's cold than it is when it's hot?
Temperature. And fluids.
Big time, big time, big time. Fluid temperature is important because of the viscosity of it. It also expands when it gets hot. And a lot of you guys have probably noticed when you pull the dipstick on a transmission that's cold, you're going to see that the fluid's lower on the stick than it is. A lot of the transmission dipsticks have even got a lower reading for cold than they do hot on the dipstick. Well, now, engine oil, not so much. Engine oil is pretty much going to be the same all the time. Transmission fluid is going to be lower or higher. It expands with heat. You know, coolant does too. But so you check that, and here's a little piece of a war story here. And did I tell you guys the other day about the 99 Malibu that doesn't have a dipstick?
Oh, dipstick.
No transmission fluid dipstick. Okay. My son's got one of these cars too, and this is pretty important. There's a bunch of different ones of them that have, you know, a lot of them are coming out without dipsticks now. It really frustrates people that have to keep their transmission oil checked. But I can show you pictures and all, but I'm just going to tell you about it because you're going to run into it sooner or later. Underneath the car, on the side of the transmission there, kind of low, is a 1/8 pipe plug that you'd swear was a pressure port. But when you take that 1/8 pipe plug out with the engine running, the fluid's supposed to be just right below that hole. You dip your pocket screwdriver in there, you ought to find fluid, right? That's how you know it's full. When you take this little red cap off the top of the transaxle, you can see it down in there, and you put your transmission fluid funnel in there, and when you pour the fluid in there, where its transmission needs to be, you know, at operating temperature, you pour the fluid in there, and it starts running out that hole into your drain pan underneath there, because you got to have it low enough to where you can watch it. And when you pour the fluid in there and it starts running out that hole, engine running the whole time now, when it quits running out that hole, the transmission's full. It's not too complicated, is it? Well, the thing sets low to the ground. A lot of people don't want to fool with that. They resent the fact of having to raise it up. And so my son Matthew took his Malibu to he lives up in Mississippi, he took his Malibu to one of these places where you have an oil change done. And they'd have figured it was just going to go over everything. And when he got it back, he was having all kinds of problems with it. It didn't have any power and all that kind of thing. And I was going to start out talking about this lady that had gone to Enterprise, and she had a bunch of shops work on her car and, you know, spent a bunch of money. I don't know what shop she went to, but the guy that she worked with qualified. Well, they both qualified for work because they had government jobs. So she says, my car won't hardly run. She said it feels like there's a potato in the exhaust pipe. It won't go over 40 miles an hour, no matter how I drive. And everybody's put mass airflow sensors and talked about catalytic converters, and charged me all this money, and it still runs the same way it did. I'm just sick of spending money on it. So she brings it up here, we looked over a bunch of stuff on the engine controls and all, and I said, well, I don't really see anything here, you know, I understand what's going on, mass airflow's doing like it's supposed to, we got good fuel pressure, you know, not out of time, nothing like that. So I said, you know, this is one of those cars that doesn't have a dipstick that I need to show my guys that are in transmissions how to do this. So I raised it up with the engine running and at operating temperature, and when I took that little plug out, 2 quarts of fluid run out of the transmission. So somebody had just kept pouring fluid in there until it got to the point to where they felt like it was full. I don't know. I guess they felt like too much was better than not enough. The strange thing about that is that transmission is set apart from every other transmission I've ever known. Because every transmission out there has got, as far as a vent, if you've got a little loose thing on top of this, it looks like a little cap that's on top of the transaxle, and on the differential, there's a little cap that's got a tin cap that dances around. That is the vent, because when that oil gets warmer and colder, the air's got to come and go. Now, if that vent stops up, it blows seals and stuff. Well, on automatic transmission, you know, I was telling about my son's car the other day, would start boiling the fluid and push it out the vent and make a big misty oil behind the car. Well, this particular one, for some reason or another, most transmissions, when you overfill it with transmission fluid, it comes out the vent. Big leak, nasty. And so the deal on this thing is, it doesn't push it out the vent for some reason or another. It chokes the transmission down where it won't hardly work, keeps the car from going. I guess the torque converter is so full of fluid and it's so full everywhere else, it's fighting itself and trying to be in more than one gear at the time and stuff like that. But the long and the short of it is draining the fluid out, fixed it. Well, my son Matt, he went home and he was calling me and he says they did something. They told me they added transmission fluid, but I wasn't having any problem before. And I said, jack your car up, pull that little plug out with the engine, run it operating temperature, see how much fluid comes out there. So he jacked his car up, and it was just like the one I'm talking about that came from over there. And whenever he took the plug out, it was about 1.5 quarts, 2 quarts of fluid ran out of it. So he put the plug back in, it was running just fine. So you see what I mean? A lot of the times you can have a problem that you would think is engine related, but the transmission and engine are so married. That will only happen, as far as I know, on one of these transmissions. It's a 3TE40. I think is what the number of that is. And when you're talking about on GM transmissions, if it's T, it's transverse. If it's L, it's linear, which means it would be like a pickup.
Went to your office.
What were you pointing at?
Ladies, went to your office, she looked.
All right, let me see who she is. I'll be right back. Don't be bored.
You gotta be quicker than
All right, that was the work study student. That wasn't some lady that went in the office,
It
you know.
didn't look like.
Well, it was her. I figured Olivia would be down there in a minute to get her Explorer. Okay, now, on the Explorers, they have no dipstick, like the one sitting right out here in the service bay. It's a little different. That one has got in the pan a stand pipe. It looks like a drain plug, and it's got a pipe that sticks up inside the transmission oil pan, and sticks up in there about that far. And it's really critical for these transmission people. They want the transmission fluid to be exactly at the right level. See what I mean? So basically, you got to have it at like 185 degree transmission fluid temperature, and you take the center out of that little plug. It looks like a drain plug. It's a drain plug. In the middle of it, it's got little Torx. Take that little Torx out, and it's supposed, if the fluid's just trickling out of there, barely like a drip, 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 then that means that it's right at the top of that standpipe and it's right where it's supposed to be. You know how you put fluid back in that one? You got to have one of these little suction guns like we got over here that you put the grease in the rear end, that make sure that that's the only thing you use it for. Then you just shove the fluid up in there in the bottom of the pan. And then you make sure it's at operating temperature, and see if it dribbles back out, put it back in there. You know, some of them, and you're gonna have to look this up because they're different. Some of them have got a plug up on the side of it, kind of like an old manual transmission, where it's gotta be up to there. Now, one of the worst mistakes somebody makes when they're putting fluid back in, like somebody put a transmission back together, and they put it in there, and they won't put enough fluid in it. They'll think they got enough fluid in it. It's kind of difficult to tell because when you pour the fluid down in there, it goes down the inside of the dipstick too. And when you're pulling the dipstick out, when you got a dipstick, you'll see fluid way up the stick on one side of the dipstick, and on the other side of the dipstick it'll be dry farther down, you know. so people don't know which side to look at. And I've had people here that would build a transmission and do it right, but it would leave here without enough fluid in it, and them telling me that they checked it and it was full. And then it started acting strange, and it would be discovered that there was about 2 quarts full of fluid. Now, what if I told you that I was driving my car, and maybe somebody serviced transmission or all that kind of stuff, and I turned a corner, and it felt like it went into neutral, and then it caught again. And every time I turned the corner, it would feel like it was dropping into neutral, and then it would catch again. What comes to mind that you think might be wrong with my transmission?
Transmission fluid going to one side of the transmission not catching.
Yeah, you're sloshing the fluid, but what's the reason for it? The fluid's sloshing away from the pickup, huh?
There's not enough in there.
Not enough in there. Okay, what if I told you that I put the dipstick in it and I pulled it back out and it's showing full?
You can have broken wire.
It could also, well, that's sort of right, but it could also have the wrong dipstick tube and the wrong dipstick. So what you do in a situation like that, even if it's showing full and you're making a turn and it's dropping out like that, what you do is you add another quart of fluid and drive it to see if it improves. If it does, you might want to see about getting the actual dipstick and the tube that go with that vehicle, because somebody may put the wrong one in there, and that happens. I mean, I've known of that. You know, and it's really confuses people. Like, well, it's showing full. I don't know why it's doing this. Well, if it, you know, walks like a pig and talks like a pig, put some fluid in it. You know the thing.
I had to take a truck to the Dodge place because you hit a bump and had a broke wire and a wire on it.
Uh-huh.
You hit a bump and it go in neutral.
Yeah, yeah, it
And
can
as
do
soon
that.
as you go over the bump, you go back in gear.
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of wiring issues can do that kind of thing. Now then, let me ask you this. You've got, all of the solenoids in the transmission are fed by power from the power relay that feeds everything else the PCM controls. You know, you got a transmission set up like that. You got 3 solenoids and a pressure control solenoid, let's say. Now to begin with, and this is something that just boggled my mind when electronic transmissions first came out. The way that you would think automatic transmissions work that are electronic, you've got shift solenoids 1, 2, and 3, then you got your pressure control solenoid, right? Well, you got shift solenoids A, B, and C. They depend on how they number them and all that kind of thing. Okay, so how are you thinking? I'm thinking, well, as sequential as I am, I'm thinking that whenever shift solenoid A energizes, then you should be shifting from first to second. And when shift solenoid B energizes, you should be shifting from second to third. And then when shift solenoid C energizes, you should be shifting from third to fourth. Fellas, that ain't the way it works. If you look at those things and you draw a map, I mean, if you look at one of the little matrices, and I'm trying to find you one of those, all over the map, they're liable to be on, off, all on, all off, but it'll tell you in the gear position and the gear it's in, whether they're on or whether they're off. It's really important to know that. There's also it's a little table, you know, that's got, you know, up one side the gear range and over here the gear that it's in. They'll also have one telling you, one of those telling you which components are holding and which are driving and which are being driven, which are applying and all this kind of. So you need to know that kind of thing. Gather as much data as you possibly can. And one of the things, some of you guys, I think Zach and Justin have actually put the transmission pressure gauge and seen what the pressure does whenever you're driving and all that. Y'all did that. And everybody needs to get familiar with that. Huh? Did I call you something else? What did I call you?
Exactly.
Yeah, we got 2 Z's in here, and I was messed up. Zine and Zach, okay. So, I get y'all mixed up because you both start with Z and you got 4-letter names and ZA, you know, so. But one way or another, there was a Cadillac one time that I worked on, a 1982 Cadillac diesel Eldorado. Oh, this is a rich deal. So the guy's driving down the road and he hits a muffler that's laying in the road, and he busts the transmission housing. Okay, now I'm working at the Ford place. This thing winds up at the Ford place, and it's a dadgum Cadillac Eldorado diesel with a busted transmission housing. And I was a line mechanic then. And so what I had to do on that one was I had to pull the transmission out and get a transmission case, a brand new transmission case, and take all of the guts out of the old transmission and put it in the new one and put all that back together. Of course, after we got through, the guy says, hey, by the way, my power antenna used to work too. Well, you look, it'd been unplugged for years, you know what I'm saying? He's trying to get everything put out of insurance. I mean, what it was. That was a big job. Not only did it mess up the transmission, but did something to the engine oil pan. I can't remember what it was. It seemed like I had to put an oil pan on it and all that. But whenever I put it back together, it wouldn't pull. And then I recognized, as I looked at the case over there, I said, doggone it, I left the pressure control valve in the case, so it didn't have any fluid pressure, so I had to pull the pan back off and put the pressure control valve in it, which basically you put it up there and it snap ring and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I always want to, making sure that everybody recognizes too, is this, if you're working on a transmission, and, you know, I talked to him the other day about this one guy that was working on one of these Ford transmissions, and he kept pulling it apart and putting it back together and putting it in the truck and it wouldn't pull. And then I found out at the end of the day that he hadn't replaced any of the rubber seals on the pistons in the clutch packs, and they were like peanut butter. And he just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked on that thing. But he would rattle all them parts apart and put them back together. And, you know, he was one of those people that was sharp enough to where I felt like he understood that those rubber lip seals needed to be fixed and all that. Now, some of the lip seals have got to have seal protectors in them. Here's another war story, since you guys like war stories. I was working at a Lincoln Mercury dealer in Dothan in 1984, and I was doing transmissions over there. And this vehicle that belonged to Ford Motor Credit or something, it was some, you know, company, it was nearly brand new. And it came in there, and it was an ATX transmission. Hey, young lady, thank you.
Mr. Claney said that the length is not the issue, it's the size of the screw round.
The size of the screw?
Yes, sir, it won't fit down in there.
Well, what I had to do on the other one is it didn't fit in there, but I had to make it cut threads on the way through so it would hold. I need to come over there when I get a chance to look at that because I had to fix it last time. So
All right, thank
tell her
you.
what she needs to call me when she's got time. We'll try to get together.
Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Okay. Anyhow, so the thing comes in and it doesn't shift. When it's a brand new car practically, the car doesn't have 5,000 miles on it. And I drive it and it won't shift. So if I've got a car and it's full of fluid and it won't shift, what are you thinking?
Stone valve,
It was not an electronic transmission, it was fully hydraulic.
they got stone valve.
No. What is it how does it know it's supposed to shift to the next gear, guys?
Transmission language.
No, that one there, no. Governor.
Sensor for
You remember the governor? Huh?
the RPM.
You can, yeah, with the RPM of the output shaft. Okay, so the RPM of the output shaft, the final drive, is actually spinning. There's a gear on the, there's a gear on this thing, on the end of it, behind that bearing that presses on there. And it actually is a little helical cut plastic gear, and on one side of it, it drives the speedometer, and on the other side of it, it drives the governor. And the governor, you pop a little wire off and you pull a little cover off like you do on a 350 Turbo Hydromatic, and you pull the governor out, and it's got a little helical gear on the bottom of it. All right, so I said, well, there must be something wrong with the governor on this thing, because if it won't shift, it don't know it's driving. Now, on one that's got a vehicle speed sensor that tells it how fast it's going so that it can electronically shift it, if the speed sensor is bad, or if the speed sensor quits putting out when you're driving down the road, it'll drop into low gear, scare you to death. All right, and I've had that happen. You know, driving down the road, and all of a sudden the speed sensor goes dark, and it says, wait, I need to shift back into first gear. Boom! You know, and you didn't know this was coming. Scare the daylights out of it. But anytime you got one that won't shift at all, it won't even shift out of low, then that's what you're looking at. So I pull the governor out. I look at it. We got a little plastic, long, skinny plastic gear, about bigger as your finger on the bottom of it, that is supposed to hook with this helical gear that as it spins, it's supposed to spin that governor. As it spins the governor, the flyweights move out, it moves a valve in it, it changes the pressure, it pops it on up through the gear. See, governor pressure, remember I told you governor pressure and throttle valve pressure do this? You deeper into the throttle, it holds the gears longer. You let off on the throttle, it shifts sooner. All right, so, oh, I have several more stories, and more are coming to mind. I could keep you all busy here until 4:30. But what happened was, I put a governor in it. I said, they need a governor for this. They got me a governor, popped it in there, I drove it, everything's great. A week later, I was running the koala bear. It came in on the hook. You know, what's all this? So when I pulled it out of there, I noticed that the little gear, which was supposed to be straight on either side, was like an hourglass in the middle. It was worn off a little bit. So I pulled the pan on this one, the valve body's on the top, and when you pull the pan, you're looking at this up in there, you know, with the CV axle snap into here and all. Okay, and so I got this thing, and I'm looking, and that little gear that's supposed to be driving the governor and the speedometer is rattling around loose on there. I mean, it's still there, it's rattling around loose, and so when I put that gear that wasn't worn out, it drove it for a while until it wore those plastic gears out. Well, I had to replace that gear, which meant that I had to take this little bearing carrier out, and I had to take this out of there, which had a ring gear riveted to it. And so I went ahead and got that out of there. And when I got that out of there, I put another one of those gears on there, and I put some brass shim stock under it so it'll be good and tight. And that bearing's supposed to keep it tight, and then that one was fixed. That was the deal on that. So I mean, basically that one there, it paid, they said you had to pull the transmission to get this out of there, but I managed to get it out of there without pulling the transmission, and so I earned 6 hours labor in about an hour and 45 minutes on that one. You know, of course I had some scrambling I had to do on the other one. But anyway, that same job, the guy down the way there, Bobby, had a Lincoln that had a transmission leak, so he pulled it out, put a front seal in it, put it all back in there, still had a leak. And his on that one was leaking from that button on the front of the torque converter that I told you about. You know, this thing right here, it was leaking around there, around that button in the middle. Be prepared for that. But there was another one that came to mind a minute ago that I worked on. Oh, I remember what it was. It was a one just like you're working on over there right now. It was in a Dodge Caravan. And this lady that owned it brought it down here, and she says the people at the filling station checked my transmission and they said there's water in the fluid. Okay, so how's water going to get in the fluid on the transmission? Anybody know?
Unless you got it on the water and it sucks it through that vent.
Possibly, that's a good answer. A lot of times the vent will have a hose on it that's up like this and it's turned so it can get air, but it's hard for water to get in there. But that's a good answer. That's something you can think about. How else is it going to get in there? Through the cooler, yeah. What were you saying? Through the transmission cooler? That's right. I was thinking like Zane. And I says, okay, this must have been you know, it had some water in it. It wasn't a lot. You know, it was like milky sort of, and you could tell there was water in it. So I said, well, we need to see about putting a radiator in this thing. But then as I got to investigating that, I found out on that 2005 Dodge Caravan, the cooler doesn't go to the radiator. It's an external cooler. It's in front of the radiator, which a lot of them have like that. They got a cooler that's nowhere, doesn't even go into the radiator, it just goes in front. It's just a cooler with tubes and fins and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, how does Sam Hill water get in this thing? Because I'm scratching my head about that. And I told her, I said, I tell you what, let's do. I said, let's go ahead and do a fluid exchange on this thing and put this solenoid pack on there. The solenoid pack is real easy to change on the front. And so we did all of that. And she drove it. I wrote an article for the magazine about it. And some guy wrote me an email that told me how stupid I was because if it's even got a teaspoon of water, you're supposed to take it out and rebuild it, and you're going to have trouble with that transmission. It's never going to be right again. And la 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 la. Well, see, by the time this thing came out in the magazine, about 6 months had gone by from the time we did the job, because when I write the article for the magazine, it doesn't go into the magazine the following month. It goes in several months down the line. So I was reading his email, and he was just really talking ugly. So I called her up before I ever said anything back to him. And I says, Diane, how is that van running that we did that transmission work on it? She says, I've been driving it to Montgomery twice a week. It's doing just fine. I hadn't had any more trouble with it. See what I'm saying? So what I did, and this is the way Jonathan would think, I got the guy back on email, and I said, proof's in the pudding, buddy. We didn't rebuild the transmission. It's working just fine, you know. So maybe the preconception you got about a teaspoon of water meaning the transmission's got to be rebuilt is maybe a little bit of overkill. You know, I don't like to do a bunch of stuff, don't have to. Well, one day the president of college, he's driving, you remember, you guys know the dark blue Impala that we do inspections on? Yeah. Okay, so it's real similar to the one you guys did the alignment on a while ago. Okay, he says, I went over to the shop over there in the other town, And he says, and every time I have them look at it, because they were inspecting it over there, he says, I tell them about the transmission acting up, because the transmission will do crazy things periodically and all that, and he says, and they won't ever do anything about it. Well, you know, they don't really do a lot about transmissions anyway over there, you know, they don't know about them, they just basically were doing the inspection and getting him out the door. And so he came over here and was talking to me about it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's do. This is a Friday morning, I don't have a lot of time, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and drain the fluid in the filter, drain the fluid, put a filter on it, not do a full fluid exchange, gotta have time for that. Just gonna do a transmission service and pour some seafoam transmission additive in it. Because the worst case scenario is everything will stay just like it is. The best case scenario is it'll fix it, you know? So he says, okay, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, it's not gonna cost a lot to do that. So we went ahead, changed the fluid and filter, poured seafoam in it. Of course, this thing, you know, it hadn't been abused, it didn't have all the miles on it, it shouldn't have been on war, it had less than 100,000 on it. And after I did that, he didn't have any more trouble with it, it's still running today. And that's been like a year and a half, 2 years ago. See what I'm saying? Sometimes what's cheap and quick, you know, cheap and easy is that. I like to do what's cheap and easy first anyway, and then go deeper if you have to. There was a girl coming here one time and she had a GM car with a front wheel drive transmission, and I think it was that same one, 1460E or whatever. So she's driving along and she says, when I come up to a traffic stop, like a stop sign, it goes, and it stalls. And it does that almost every time I pull up to a traffic stop. Now, what do you think's going on there?
Not shifting down and it's loading up.
Hmm?
Not shifting down and it's loading up.
It's staying, the torque converter's staying locked. When you got torque converter lock up, you got a straight hookup all the way from the engine all the way through to the final drive. And if it doesn't, if that torque converter doesn't unlock, it's like you're trying to just put your foot on, without putting your foot on the clutch, you're trying to just come to a stop in high gear, kill it. And so we weren't really working on transmission that semester, but you know, I want to help a girl out. And I said, why don't we do a transmission service on it and pour some seafoam in it. Seafoam about $10 a can, transmission service don't cost that much here. Pop the pan off, you know, get the filter off and everything, look and see if you see anything in the pan. So we did that, and first we checked to make sure there wasn't any electrical problems. We did do that, but then we didn't find any. And so when we poured that seafoam in there, and I'm not trying to, you know, advertise for seafoam, but you know, Lucas is good, and there's some other stuff. We pour that stuff in there, and what's funny about it is she drove that thing and it never did that again. See what I mean? I mean, so basically you can actually go crazy and, you know, jerk it out, tear it down, rebuild it, and put it back in, all that kind of thing. One more, and I don't think I ever told you guys about this. The guy that the Ford place, I was usually the guy that whenever they ran out of ideas, they'd come over and want me to try to help them figure it out. I didn't have all the answers, couldn't always figure it out, but they would usually come over there just, I guess because they wanted to aggravate me or something. But anyway, so this guy, he says, I'm working on this 94 F-150, and he says, by the time it shifts through all of its gears, and it's in high gear, it's only going 25 miles an hour. So it goes through every one of its gears, and it's only going 25 miles an hour. When it's in its highest gear, it shifts out too early. And I pulled it out, and I tore it down, I put, you know, clutches and seals in it, and all. I even put a valve body in it, and it's still doing the same thing. He said, I don't know what to do to it. Now this guy was a transmission mechanic. I was doing drivability and electronics at the time. And what's funny about that was, he says, he also worked on my wife's Tempo. That's another story. And I was going to tell that one, but I'm going to run out of time because I see clock watchers here. But anyway, he says, so I went over there and I says, okay, so here you got a situation where it obviously thinks it's a four-wheel drive. He said, yeah, it's a four-wheel drive. He said, it was aggravating to pull that thing. I said, oh, let's look at this. So I go in there and I switch on the key, and I don't see any of the lights, the warning lights on the dash burning. And I said, what about all these warning lights that aren't burning? He said, I don't care about that. I mean, it didn't come in here for that. And I said, well, let's just talk about these warning lights for a minute. I said, how does it know you're in four-wheel load? Huh? I said, how does it know you're in four-wheel load? Do you even know how it knows you're in four-wheel load? I mean, it's got to know that somehow so it'll know to change the shift strategy. Sounds to me like you're in four-wheel load. He said, heck, I don't know. And I says, don't you have a light on the dash that says four-wheel load when you put it in four-wheel load? Yeah. Okay, so what I'm submitting to you, that the engine controller is looking at the wire that's going between that light and the switch that turns it on,